was it like when you heard them say, Robertum Franciscus, you know the Pope, he's your friend. I, did, can you even put your head around it yet?
No. Excuse me. I was already vacationing in Italy at the time, and this was planned the year before. And then several months before I left for Italy, I called Rome, Father Richie Mercado, who works in the dicastery for bishops. And I said, hey, Richie, arrange for me to come to Rome, and I want to spend the weekend there. So I was in the south and was spending a beautiful day at the Mediterranean. And I got back to my room to get ready for dinner. And I received a call from Peru. One of our friars there called me up, and actually one who had been formed by uh, Cardinal Prevost, Pope Leo at the time. And he said, Humo Blanco, Humo Blanco. So I got into my Vatican feed and watched it for the hour. When the doors of the loggia opened, sitting there with bated breath, I guess I can say, and thinking, no, this is not going to happen. It happened. So when I heard his name in Latin, I nothing short of being thrilled to know that we have our first American and our first Augustinian.
And you are celebrating your 41st anniversary of your ordination. Congratulations this year. You go to Rome and you get a special invitation on that first weekend of his papacy.
So I get to Rome the very next day on Friday, and it was a media frenzy, as you know, Anne, right?
Yes.
And I was hanging out with my fellow friars, and media were coming in and out of our compound there, Santa Monica and the Curia. And Father Joe Farrell, who is currently our newly elected general, comes up to me and he says, Tony, don't say anything. But tomorrow, Saturday, we're going to go down to Genazzano. Now, Genazzano was the church of the icon of our Mother of Good Counsel, who was the patron of the order. And so we went down the next day, and it was just a handful of us. The town was ready. It was supposed to be a secret, but everybody knew it. And so when the Holy Father arrived, and by the way, he was riding shotgun in the limousine, he got out, he spoke with the crowds, he blessed them, then he came in. The church doors were closed by the security, and he was coming up to each of us friars and greeting us. And I just kept saying to myself, don't call him Bob. Don't call him Bob. So when he approached me, I said, Su Santità, and then he gave me this big smile. And so we spent that part of that afternoon with him. That was a gift in itself.
Yeah.
The greater gift was when the same Father Joe Farrell then came up to me and said, Tony, he knows it's your anniversary tomorrow, Sunday, which was Good Shepherd Sunday. And yeah, he says, well, we're going to get word, you're going to be invited to a private mass with him at the tomb of St. Peter. So that next morning, we go to his residence, and they lead us to the crypt church of the Basilica, and they vested the few of us, and we celebrated Mass, bilingual Mass, in Italian and English, and it was really quite the thrill. It was such a gift. All 41 years, every time I celebrate my anniversary, I always celebrate a Mass of Thanksgiving. And I had no clue, I had no intention this was going to happen. But I knew that the day I got to Rome, which is that Friday, I said to myself, I'm not even going to ask to see him. He was just elected, he's busy, so I kind of let that go. But I attribute the letting go of receiving the gift 100-fold when he invited me to concelebrate with him.
Yeah, Chris, the order, the Augustinians, is so important to him. Father Farrell talked about how when he was just a cardinal, he would come over every morning for morning prayer. He would eat there. That's a real source of strength for him, isn't it?
It is, and it's quite interesting just to hear Father Tony recount the experience and think about an American pope saying mass in English at the Tomb of Peter. It's something quite heady to absorb. But I just remember talking to you, Father Tony, in the days after the election, and one of the things that you really helped me understand was Augustinian governance and just how communal it is and collaborative. And I think that's sort of what grounds him and his leadership style. And I think that's what we're seeing in the early days as Pope. He's someone who seems to be intent on listening well and talking to as many people as possible. And I think he's just modeling the Augustinian playbook in that respect. And I think we see him sort of craving that community, that sort of life that he had as an Augustinian, and seeing how he can translate that into the papacy.
Yeah, Gloria, what have you noticed in these first 5 months of his papacy that you think may set the template for the rest of his papacy?
Oh, well, I think the Holy Father's emphasis on the poor is very important. Also, some of the comments, I know we'll talk about it later, but some of the comments that he's made, I really think to help the United States understand what it means to be a Catholic who believes in the Church's teaching about human dignity. It's not a narrow one, it's actually the fullness of what the Church teaches. He also had mentioned early on that he understood that something needed to be said about AI. So I also believe he's somebody that very much understands the needs of the moment in terms of modern technology, the understanding of the human person, and to remind us to focus on the poor and the elderly. So I think those are coming from a very wealthy nation that's obsessed with power and money and all this kind of stuff. I think it's a very important message for us, in particular the United States, to hear.
And even the name is significant because he is now Leo the 13th, who wrote basically was it encyclical that is the template for Catholic social teaching. And now is that what we expect him to do when confronting issues like AI and the dignity of the human person and the dignity of work? Do you expect we're going to get an apostolic exhortation tomorrow that is, I have loved you? I won't say it in Latin because I can't say Latin. But do you expect that to reflect that mission, how he sees the Church? How much should we put on that exhortation as a guide, a roadmap to his papacy? What do you think?
Sure. I think one of the things we'll see is this is a document that will show great continuity with Pope Francis. It's a document that Pope Francis was working on in his final months of life, and I think now Pope Leo has picked that up. And I think we're seeing in these early months the front burner issues emerge, such as poverty and peace and climate change. These are the issues that keep him up at night, and I think we'll see, in this document, the first major document of his papacy, a chance to sort of get a sense of how his mind works. I think he'll want to show us that the Church has always been committed to fighting poverty and standing with the poor, that this isn't some modern invention and something that is a response to the politics of the time, but he's going to take us back to the gospel.
Yeah, Gloria, you spoke about how in his recent remarks, he's reflected the fullness of our faith, that it isn't just one issue, right, that it is a multiple of issues. In fact, his comments reminded me of Cardinal Bernardine, yes, and his consistent ethic of life. Right. Let's talk about what he said last week, which was when he left Castel Gandolfo in response to a question over the fact that Cardinal Cupich was going to give an award to Senator Dick Durbin for his work on immigration and his work with migrants. And there are some within the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference, as well as other Catholics, who said, why are you honoring this man because he has voted for abortion rights? And Leo said something about, I'll paraphrase here, that if you support the death penalty, that's not pro-life. If you support inhumane treatment of migrants, that's not pro-life. Right. What did that reveal about him?
That he's Catholic and knows the teachings of the Church. I have to say, I myself, people would say I'm pro-life, but I am pro-life in the meaning of the church, that we respect the human person from the womb to the tomb, and that means all the points in between. And I think that was a revelation to people. They didn't understand that about me for some reason. They found out, which didn't win me a lot of friends, but the response to him saying something so basic was just ridiculous. I mean, the way people were like, oh, I was like, you really want to die on the death penalty? I mean, that's what you really want to step apart from the church on? So there was this outcry, I would say, within the sector of the Church of the United States that would consider themselves pro-life, like just having a fit over the death penalty and also being upset that he said something so basic, like if you are for the inhuman treatment of the undocumented, that's not really pro-life. And so with the Holy Father making those very clear, simple statements that I think anybody can understand, it reframes in the right way our understanding of the word pro-life, which I think had been basically truncated and used for partisan reasons. And by the Pope saying this, he says, you have to think with the mind of the church, not with the mind of a political party, when you are considering issues of life and what matters. And also, I think it challenges those of us who want to say that we're pro-life to understand it's not just this one issue. You have to have a complete issue of the human person and really lean into what it means for the human person to be made in the image and likeness of God. And I'm going to make this really brief. I remember during the murder of George Floyd, so many of my pro-life friends didn't have a pro-life attitude because they were like, well, remember he did this and he did that. And I was like, but that's not what the church teaches. Everybody is to be respected no matter what they've done, no matter what they're going to do, because of who they are. And also, I was like, as a person that's pro-life, he didn't have a natural death. And that was one of the things that, as a pro-life person, was very important to us, is that people have a natural death. But for some reason, in this space, that understanding of the human person was lost when it came to George Floyd, all for political reasons, I believe.
And yet, this week when he left Castle Gandolfo, because this seems to be where he does his gaggle, if you will, with the press, he said he didn't want to get into U.S. politics. How hard is it going to be for him to walk that tightrope? Because I call it the papal doll phase of his papacy. Everybody's pinning their hopes on him, hoping he'll be on their side or think the way they do. How hard will it be?
Yeah, I kind of laugh because watching that video, he says, I don't really know a lot about the situation, but if I recall, Senator Durbin's been in public life for 40 years. And so he knew some of the contours of the debate pretty well. And I think he also has a brother living in Chicago, so he knows that sort of background. Look, I think what we saw in him weighing in that moment is that he's not going out there looking for a fight. I think he's quite invested in bringing the temperature down inside and outside of the church. But I think he's going to avoid sort of being sort of leading with his American passport, but when he needs to use his voice, he will. He's not going to get dragged into unnecessary debates, but I think he will pick and choose his battles carefully.
Father Pizzo, you've seen him up close as a leader, and there's a story you told Chris that's in his book about when you were both young priests and you went to him because you needed help. Can you tell that story, and what does it demonstrate about now Pope Leo and how he may lead the church?
Sure. Actually, both of us were young professed. We weren't ordained yet.
Oh, really?
He's a year ahead of me.
Okay.
So we were living in our formation house in Chicago and going to CTU for our theological and ministerial formation. And so I was new to all of this. I had one pair of shoes. I was taking this poverty vow pretty seriously. And I had holes in the shoes. So I went up to the father prior of the community and I said, Father, I think I need a new pair of shoes. I told him, and he said, do you really need them? So I thought, oh, this is really more intense than I thought it was. Well, Bob, at the time, if you will, was right next door to me in our house. And I happened to run into him, and I said, hey, I just talked to Father Fred about these shoes. And he said, well, here's what you do, Tony. He says, go out and buy the shoes and put the receipt on his desk. And I thought, really? He said, yeah, which I did. He even offered to give me the money if I didn't have money. What that illustrates, I believe, is that Pope Leo is a very practical man. He thinks practically. He's very pragmatic in his approach to almost everything. And this is what we're going to see. He's always been consistent with this. I always found him to be balanced. There's an equilibrium about his approach to anything. Besides being very attentive to you, when you talk to him, this guy looks straight in your face. Yeah. And recall as well that he was very much involved in the Synod for Synodality as well. I think that's just reflective of his character.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, hearing you talk about the story with the shoes, it reminds me of talking to cardinals that worked with him on the Dicastery for Bishops, which is the Vatican office that helps vet potential bishops. And multiple bishops said to me, what he will do is he'll let everyone have their say. They go around the round table, but then he knows when a decision has to be taken. And I think that sort of parallels with the shoe story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's not afraid to make a decision.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Gloria, one of the interesting things about this Pope has been watching news organizations reveal his lineage.
Yeah.
His heritage is fascinating. It's not, it's not like his parents came over on the boat from Italy or Ireland and that was it.
Right.
He is truly a product of the melting pot of this nation. How do you think that will form his papacy? And will that attract people who come from similar backgrounds to the Catholic Church?
So I was a papal news correspondent for ABC during the conclave, and when they announced who it was, my husband speaks Latin, so he was like, oh, it's the American, and I was like, wah! So we were like screaming, and I was trying to get it together before they came to me, about the new Holy Father. But I have to tell you, when he walked out and they showed him, I was like, Uncle? I mean, he just looked so much like the people in my family. So it was not a surprise to me to learn that his mother was from Louisiana, or her family was from Louisiana, and during the Great Migration, a lot of Black Americans left the rural South and went to the North, the Midwest, and the West. It wasn't surprising to me that her family came from the 7th Ward, which is typically where African Americans lived in New Orleans, and moved to Chicago. And a lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot, there was a thing called Passe Blanc, where Black people, when they went elsewhere, if they could pass for white, they would. It's a means of survival, for better education, better jobs, but that really is more of a commentary on American life at that time. So his mother, having Haitian descent, being known as a Creole of color, and then marrying who she married and having her son, by the rules of American race, the Holy Father is Black. I mean, that's typically what the rules on race have been, how they classify people. Although that was not his experience, his lived experience, but it is a shared heritage that at least I and many other Black people in the United States feel that we have with him, although he doesn't have our lived experience. Now, with the Holy Father also having lived in Peru, a lot of Peruvians see him as theirs as well. And I think what the Holy Father brings with his background and the choices of where he has lived is a broader perspective on what it means to be a member of the church, right? And I also think, in a way, he's a quiet witness against the problems in the church in the United States, knowing that for a large part of the history of the United States, Black men were not allowed to become priests. Now imagine what would have been lost if his family hadn't been able to pass, and he was still known as a Black man. Would he have been able to become a priest and then our Holy Father? So I do think it's a commentary for something the Church in the United States needs to grapple with. And but I do think he's one that brings everybody together because everybody sees themselves in him.
I thought in the interview that Elise and Ellen did with with him for her new book. He seems quite taken with all that's come out about his lineage. Father Tony, did he ever talk about, did he identify as French or Chicago? I mean, we all identify in some way, shape, or form. You identify as a Sicilian. Did he identify?
He did. He always identified himself with being of French descent. We knew his mom was of Spanish descent because her maiden name was Martinez. But nonetheless, he always identified himself with being French. As a matter of fact, his coat of arms, if you look, the fleur-de-lis, is indicative of his pride in his French background on his father's side.
Chris, Tony spoke about the pragmatism of Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo. When you were researching his history in Peru, did that come through? I think there are a couple of wonderful pictures. He's in waders, he's fixing a beat up old car. I mean, is that just a photo op, or is that who he was when he was in Peru?
We've got the photo here now. I think you talked to people that knew him in Peru, and he was just responsive to the needs of the people. There's a great video on YouTube of, I forget the parish in Illinois, where he visited in the summer of 23 or 24, right after he had been made a cardinal. And he says, being a priest in Peru was where I was formed. It was my time as a missionary is what made me who I am. And I think that's so key to understanding him. Last week I was on a panel and they said, if you could come up with one word to describe Leo, what would it be? And I said, missionary. Because I think that's instinctively what he draws on when he thinks of what it means to be a pastor. And I think despite the fact there was an age gap and different life stories, that's why Francis identified him as someone so keen to sort of carry on his vision and to bring him to Rome to head this very powerful Vatican office, because he knew he was a missionary who was responsive to the needs of the people.
Is there a sense that Francis, by appointing him to be dicastery, to lead the dicastery of bishops, essentially laid hands on him to say, this is my choice? I mean, what's the thought?
I don't think that Pope Francis was trying to sort of engineer the election or put this thumb on the scale, but I do think if you look at his very quick sort of rise in church ranks, Francis was saying, one, I want my priests and bishops to lead like he does, and secondly, that this is someone you should look to follow, and then he left it up to the 133 cardinals to do that work.
What about Tony? Did he, before he was Pope Bob, when he was just Bob, did he ever talk about his relationship with Pope Francis?
The few times that we had contact after he was appointed Bishop of Chiclayo, he talked about how he and Francis would gather together periodically, especially when he was prefect of the dicastery for bishops. Every Saturday they had to meet. But he always spoke very highly of Pope Francis. And at one point, I remember him saying, well, we've been friends. And that to me was like, okay, by the very fact, then he went from being Bishop of Chiclayo to prefect of the dicastery to being created cardinal, deacon, then cardinal bishop. We knew something was going on here.
Mm-hmm.
They started every Saturday morning together. That was his the Pope's first appointment. And someone who worked closely with the cardinal said to me, they had this sort of game that they would play, because Pope Francis would notoriously arrive early for his appointments. And Cardinal Prevost knew that, and so they would try to beat each other to see who could arrive there first. And Cardinal Prevost never won.
I love that. That's great. You also spoke to somebody who was close to Francis, who says Francis told her something that she didn't understand in the moment, but now looking back, she thinks maybe.
This was someone who works in the Vatican who had joked with the Pope, when you're out of here, I'm out of here as well. And the Pope said to her, your successor, and I think you're going to love him, which she took as a sign of Pope Francis, if not knowing it was Cardinal Prevost, was very confident in whoever was going to succeed him.
Yeah. Gloria, the church seems so divided. In much the U.S. Catholic Church is much like the U.S. We have become extraordinarily tribal. We only talk to people who agree with us. We only listen to media that tells us what we like to hear. How can he? I know he's got 1.4 billion people to worry about.
Yeah.
But for our little, but what can he do? What should U.S. Catholics be looking for that we might, from him, that we might be able to use in our own lives?
Well, I think the Holy Father pretty much reframes the whole notion of American Catholicism, right? A lot of times, the way Catholicism is seen here is through the lens of political parties, and the Holy Father reminds us that the Catholicism is through the lens of the church. You know, all our thoughts and ideas and everything needs to come through the lens of the faith. And even with the Holy Father recently at a climate change event, had blessed a block of ice, and people were losing their minds about it. And so I was saying to people, remember, water has 3 stages. Solid, liquid, and gas, and you can bless it because it's holy water, right? But people were, so I think what he does is he reframes the faith in the right way, and he doesn't necessarily align with anything except the gospel. And I think that's very much what we need in the United States to reorient ourselves properly to why we're Catholics. It's not because of temporal power, but because of who Christ is. So, yeah.
And one of the things he's carrying on is at Castel Gandolfo, they have created this living laboratory of Laudato Si, the Pope Francis encyclical on the environment, and it's headed by another Chicagoan, Father Manny Durantes. But if you are going to Italy and you're going to go to the Vatican, make sure you go down to Castel Gandolfo, because I think what they're trying to do there is to show us how we can live a better life, be gentler to the environment, be kinder to people, to lead the kind of life that Christ asked us to do, which is a pretty extraordinary thing. Do we expect him? All signs show that he is a pope of continuity at this point. But where might we see him differ from Francis? Where might we see him make his own unique mark on this papacy?
Well, he's stylistically very different from Pope Francis. Pope Francis was a reporter's dream and a nightmare, as you know well, Anne. I mean, because he was just so spontaneous that you never knew what he was going to say or do, and he preached through gestures. And so, whether it was bringing refugees back on a plane with him, or the way in which he just sort of spontaneously embraced people, that sort of caught the Vatican apparatus off guard, because they were so used to things being done in a certain formulaic way where you don't dare break protocol. I think one of the things that Leo has done very well, in a sense, is put everyone at ease, in a sense, inside the Vatican, that they know how the script is going to go at this point. I think he'll make his own mark through sort of the issues that he chooses to focus on. Certainly, we heard in that the first speech he gave the night of his election, the call for peace 9 times. I think that is the issue that keeps him up at night. And I think that is where he'll try to sort of use any platform, a megaphone that he has, to sort of bring about peace. But I do think the signature way in which he will be a pope that is different from Francis is in the way he manages. Pope Francis was externally focused, and I think Leo is going to take the reforms that Francis initiated and try to get the house in order and bring about some in-house Vatican reforms. And I would suggest that perhaps him being an American also will really be useful here. He'll probably want to involve lay people and real outside experts, particularly when it comes to issues like finances and communications and just issues that, the average priest or bishop may not be trained in. I think he wants good governance, and I think he's not afraid to bring in the right experts for that.
Tony, where do you see him making his mark?
Well, first of all, I think, Chris, thank you for that explanation, because that's very true. His character, his personality, all of his life has been very consistent with this. He's a good listener. Oh. And he takes synodality to the nth degree. And it's going to be very important for him that he teaches us by example. As you've seen in some of these photos that were displayed, he's out there and he's going to walk with you. And he is going to talk with you. Right now, as it stands, I get inundated by people who are saying, hey, listen, I'm going to Rome. Can you arrange an audience for me? And this is pretty much constant. It's like, all right, here's what you do. Go to the prefecture of the papal household and throw in your request. But here's what he'll do, is that he will stop and he will talk to you if you indicate to him that you would like to say a word. So he's very personable this way. And by the very fact that he does respond with texting and email, also indicates that he's going to maintain this very personable approach to leading the church, because it's very important for him that we have these connections. It's also very Augustinian. Remember that we emphasize the importance of community. All religious orders emphasize community. But here, because of St. Augustine's ideals, because at the very time he came out on the loggia, he said, I am a son of St. Augustine, is very indicative of his commitment to the order and to the church, which actually our spirituality is based on Acts chapter 4. They came together in common and shared all things in common, to each according to his need. And this is very, very important, because he will give you that individual attention if he needs to, but he's not a pushover.
Yeah.
He's a man who's very committed to maintaining his focus, moving ahead, and continuing to remind us that we all have responsibilities, because we are free people under the realm of grace. That's very Augustinian.
Gloria, where do you see him making his mark?
Well, right now, I think, at least with the chatter in the United States, a lot of people have been looking at him as what is he going to do with the traditional Latin Mass? And it seems like he has a more conciliatory approach to it, because he allowed Cardinal Burke to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. I'm just watching to see how he manages that, because he has recognized that it has been approached and used improperly in the United States, the kind of attitudes that have been associated with it. I also fully expect him to talk about the things that are really going to challenge us as the United States Catholics with our partisanship. I really do. The fact that he's emphasized peace, the fact that he's emphasized the humane treatment of undocumented peoples. Also, I think he's going to have something to say about our consumerist attitudes, considering how he has lived and understanding the faith, to really challenge us on that. And also with AI replacing human persons in terms of work, I think he'll have something to say about that, because there's a dignity in work, and we all need to have some work that is respectable of our human dignity. So those are the things that I'm expecting to see from the Holy Father. And then sometimes, depending on the world stage, what kind of crazy things the United States does, people are going to look at the Holy Father like, what do you have to say about that? So I do think he'll be put in that place of having to say, what do you think about that when we do things as a country that is,
Well, just speaking to that, Gloria, this morning he met with a group of bishops and migrants from Texas, and they showed him videos of those that were fearful of deportations, and he said it's the job of the church to speak out against injustice. I stand with you and you stand with me. So as you said, I think he's keenly aware of the dynamics of life in his home country, while at the same time not wanting to be perceived as an American pastor, but he's a pastor for the global church.
Yeah, and I thought one of the interesting comments that he's made regarding Russia and Ukraine, Francis, during his papacy, I think always left the door open for the Vatican to be a mediator. I mean, it was why while he would talk about martyr Ukraine, I think once mentioned Putin by name, never criticized him, so the Vatican could be a mediator in peace talks. Leo seemed to back away from that, not wanting to offer the Vatican that, or not having the Vatican play that kind of role. Were you surprised by that? And how does that change his efforts to create world peace?
I think he was, prior to becoming Pope, far more specific in his language about the circumstances regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was quite pointed in a way that Pope Francis was not. And in that very first, I believe it was the Sunday after he was elected, when he gave his first Sunday Angelus from the Loggia, he made it very clear that a just peace would be required, and he named who the aggressor was and who was aggressed against. And so he got quite specific right away, whereas Francis, it took him some time to ratchet up his own criticism of the war. I think he's trying to do two things rather. I think he's trying to say, on one hand, the Vatican wants to call for peace in any way we can, and we'll do anything to use our convening power to help that. At the same time, I think he realizes the Russia-Ukraine conflict is very messy and has all of these religious dimensions because they're two Orthodox nations at war with each other. And the idea of a Catholic mediator, I don't think any sort of outside geopolitical expert took seriously at all. And I think he's just acknowledging that reality.
We all know that when we deal with leaders, everyone's got their own leadership style. I know a number of people are comparing Pope Leo with Francis, and he's going to carry on his legacy. To a certain point, he will. But he's really been emphasizing peace. Obviously, his first words to the crowd when he stepped out in the loggia, right? Peace be with all of you. I was present and concelebrated the Mass of the canonization of Carlo Acutis, as well as Pier Giorgio Frassati. This was strategic, by the way, 2 young men who died at an early age. He came out, he broke with protocol. He came out before Mass, before he was vested, and he greeted the crowds out there. And he mentioned a few things to raise our awareness that we're not here only for the celebration, but we're here because we are committed to what is good, right, and just. His last lines before he then left the stage to get vested was, God does not want war. God wants peace. I mean, he yelled that out. And we're all like looking at each other and we're saying, we think this guy knows what he wants.
Yeah.
And but it's just wonderful, and it's like a breath of fresh air to know that he is going to do everything he can, but he's going to be diplomatic in doing it.
I would say with his emphasis on peace, it started, one of the things I was like, what is the Lord telling us? Are we going to have another world war? Are we on the brink of it? So those are the things I've been thinking about with his emphasis on peace, because we do believe that the Holy Spirit guides them as to who to pick to be our Holy Father. And with his emphasis on this, it has made me think about where might there be opportunities for us to really lean into peace. And I'm also thinking about even the language in the United States, how we talk about each other, and some people being seen as enemies, even though they're citizens, brings to front, what does peace really mean and how do we achieve it?
And so to that end, when we look at tomorrow's apostolic exhortation, and we have seen in this country, in some areas, the demonization of immigrants, we have seen disrespect or discounting of poor people, of the need that needs to support. This is an organization that faces these issues every single day in the most personal ways possible. So what are you looking for from this exhortation that could help inspire, help make their jobs easier and better? How can Pope Leo do that?
Again, I think he reframes the whole disposition toward the poor. I have to say I was completely disgusted with how Catholic Charities was attacked by the administration, and also by how so many pro-life Catholics carried the water for that. And I was like, that's not pro-life to discount the poor. It just didn't make sense to me. So I'm hoping with the Holy Father's emphasis, he can recapture that portion of the church that wanted to vilify those who we're supposed to love and serve, who are our neighbor. So that's what I'm hoping comes out of this exhortation that the Holy Father will be releasing.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've seen in these 5 months since he's been elected is everyone wants to kind of claim Leo as their own. But there was a movement among some people just because after he was elected, they started scrolling down his Twitter account. And how crazy is that the Pope had a Twitter account? But, people sort of saw what he said about the poor or migrants on Twitter and dismissed him as a woke Pope. And I think tomorrow's exhortation will be a reminder that what he is saying now about poverty and what Francis said about poverty and what Benedict said about poverty goes way back for 2,000 years. This isn't some modern invention, but it goes back to the heart of the faith.
It's going to be interesting to get the Pope's reaction or his response to what Villanova University is doing right now with the Cabrini Institute of Immigration and this project, if you want to call it that, of demonizing immigrants, because this is pretty much in line with where he's at. And as you know, Villanova is his alma mater, our alma mater, and it's the premier university for the Augustinians here in the United States. So that decision to move in that direction is in line with his particular pastoral vision regarding this major issue.
I think one of the things that has happened is it's become an us versus them mentality. We see, at least in this country, the poor, the migrants have been portrayed as the other and dehumanized, if you will, and characterized as invaders and criminals and what have you. Can he change that viewpoint, that the way that the poor and migrants are looked at in this country with this exhortation? Can he put a human face back on this issue?
I think it's very possible, seeing his popularity so early on when he was elected and the consistency of his popularity, people are listening. Now, whether people internalize what's being said or what will be said by him is a whole nother thing, because I always say you can't crawl into the mind and the heart of another person. All we can do is we can accompany one another, we can talk, we can discuss, we can dialogue, and hope that there will be an influence there toward recognizing what we've been talking about here, the dignity and integrity of every human being. And he is very committed to this.
Well, don't you think he could change the news cycle if he's consistently speaking about the poor? The press has to report on that. And I think it will keep it in the forefront of the American news cycle if he's consistently speaking about the poor, which I think gives us an opportunity to reflect more deeply on what that means. He's recaptured what the church is focusing on in terms of the news cycle in the United States, I think, if he continues to speak that way.
Yeah, I think, one document isn't going to, change the hearts and minds of people, but credible witnesses will. And I think, one of the things the document hopes to do is nudge people to a different understanding of the human person and how we view the poor among us. And hopefully over time, that can change hearts and mind.
Yeah, I think of Pope Francis's first exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel, and how he wanted to throw open wide the doors of the church, how he saw the church as a field hospital. Those phrases really set the tone, I think, for his papacy. And I know tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. when they have the press conference, I'm sort of looking for that. Are we going to see those kind of phrases people can grab onto that say, this is who Pope Leo is, and this is what his papacy will be about?
He will continue to lead by example, as Pope Francis coined the phrase that pastors have to smell like the sheep. Pope Leo smells like the sheep.
So my big question to finish up is, Tony, what do you call him? Do you call him Bob? Do you call him Your Holiness? Do you call him Pope? What do you call your friend?
I've caught myself in some interviews and just talking with people when I refer to him as Bob. And I don't know if I need to be careful about that, because he signed a text, relatively recent. Bob, a.k.a. Leo. As if I didn't know where it came from.
When you get a text from the Pope, I can't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth. But I mean, do you kind of like sit up in bed and go, okay, I got to get on this now. I can't push it to 3 hours later.
With texting?
What?
I'm sorry, what did you ask me?
I said, when you get a text from the Pope, and can you, like, it comes in the middle, let's say it comes in the middle of the night, you wake up, you see your phone, you're like, I got to get up and do this now, or I can push it off until 3 hours later.
Well, I was doing a visitation in our Canadian house up in Vancouver for our province. And I remember one morning at 5:30, I get a call from the Cardinal Prevost. He had a question he wanted to talk to me about. And it's at 5:30 in the morning, dear God. And but we engaged in a conversation. But this is how it is. I mean, if there's something important, he will contact you.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. Now, it's not like we're getting texts all the time because this guy's a busy guy.
Yeah.
And but he does take time to look at these messages. And we'll get back. Now, his older brother Louis was in Chicago a couple of months ago. And I took him out for dinner, and we went out, and we were talking and kind of processing how his life has changed dramatically. He and his brother John as well. And so I said, hey, you know what? Let's take a selfie over here. I also had one of our priests from Peru, and all of us have white beards. And so we took the selfie, and I sent it through an email. So the Holy Father writes back, and he says, what's with the white beards?
One of my favorite stories was the Saturday that his brother John, who's the one who's from Chicago, came over. He stayed at the Augustinianum, and you went to the shrine south of Rome to pray, and then the Pope stopped by Pope Francis's grave, and then he went back to his apartment. He wasn't in the papal apartments yet. The apartment he had, which was across the street, to have dinner, and he and John ordered in pizza, just like a Saturday night in Chicago. But I think there is that grounding that seems so important to him, not to be a prince of the church, not to be truly a servant leader. That's my impression in these first 5 months. Am I wrong?
He's been very consistent in that approach. You can see even with a couple of these photographs in Peru, he really does walk with the folks, and he wants to continue to serve, and he's going to lead all of us by that example. I can guarantee that, knowing him. That's his character. That's his personality. He did that when he was prior general. He did that those couple of years he was provincial, and he certainly did it when he was in Peru serving.